An F-16 has targeted an Su-35. I think the Su-35 is a fantastic platform. It's not a fair fight at all for the F-16s. My name's Tim Davies. I was a fast jet pilot and a flight instructor in the Royal Air Force for about 2 decades, in fact. I left about 6 years ago, and I was involved in the flying training of the pilots before they went on to Typhoon F-35.
Recently, we had the first air-to-air kill where a Ukrainian F-16 shot down a Russian fighter. So I think their ability to scale their layered defense has come along a long way over the past couple years.
It was big news because it hasn't happened before. So Ukraine have shot down aircraft through ground engagements, but it's the first time that they've actually utilised an airborne asset really to prosecute Russian aircraft coming across the border. Whether that's actually what happened or not, well, that's obviously going to be talked about on the internet for a long time, isn't it? But it does seem that an F-16 has targeted an Su-35, absolutely. The F-16s that Ukraine is flying at the moment came from the Netherlands. I believe they came from Denmark. I think Belgium is about to ship them out some as well. And America's given them some F-16s as well, but mainly for spare parts. So they're the AB variants. They were built between 1982 and 1990. They use a very old radar called the ABG-66 V2, which doesn't really have the range that the Su-35 has. The Su-35 is a phased array radar. It's a much longer looking radar. It's a much better aircraft, not only in maneuverability, but in the weapons it can carry and the standoff capability it has. And what that means there is it can fire rockets a much longer way than the F-16 can. So it will dominate the airspace, really. So it's not a fair fight at all for the F-16s because they're just very old aircraft. So we have multiple assets in a battlefield. That's the whole point. So it's we try and work out how to get information from all sources, and the Royal Air Force is specifically good at doing this, of course. So what we're doing then here is you're looking and you're taking signals and you're processing those signals and you're sending them down to ground stations who are then looking at them and saying there's probably threats coming in from a certain axis. And what you'll do then is you'll send your fighters towards those threats, knowing that they're probably going to be some kind of fighters coming in to do some bombing. So it's not like the aircraft is up there just looking by itself and trying to find aircraft to shoot down. It's inherently very vulnerable when it does that. So ideally, you can even keep your fighters on the ground, or you can keep them right back in reserve. Get another asset to tell you what's happening with maybe it's got a bigger radar, or as I said, maybe it's a ground-based radar system, and then pass that information through command and control lines, in effect, to the fighters, who then can go and prosecute that. Because, of course, the fighters don't really want to turn their radars on unless they have to also, because the radars will give their position away. And that's why it looks like this was some coordinated attack between the fighters and the ground-controlled intercept, radar stations, surface-to-air missile stations, as you said, the recon, electronic warfare, early warning aircraft, all coming together in unison, which is the first time we've actually seen that happening in Ukraine. I think what America's trying to do here, and what Dan Kane's trying to say, the Chief of Staff there, is that they've built themselves, as you said, a layered air defence system. I mean, I was an electronic warfare instructor in the Royal Air Force, so ground-based air defence systems, all this kind of stuff where you layer up, gives you the best possibility of early detection and then prosecution from multiple sources as well. So ideally, you'd have a very long-range radar out in theatre, or multiples of them along the border. And what they've been doing, the Ukrainians, is pushing those Patriots, those surface-to-air missile systems, they've been pushing them right up to the front line, which is quite an unusual tactic because it makes them very vulnerable to being attacked themselves. And when you switch them on, of course, everyone knows where they are. So, of course, what you do is you put them up to the front line, but you wouldn't turn them on, so you wouldn't be giving their position away. And then as you saw the threats coming in, or I think what the Ukrainians have done is they've noted what the profiles of the Su-35s are. Seems to be quite standard profiles. And in war, people get complacent, and you capitalize on that, of course. You look for patterns. You look for the enemy doing the same thing the same day because it works. Why not do it again? And then they've seen that. They've switched on the radar system. The radar system has then passed the information onto the fighters. The fighters have then gone on to in the direction of the threat. And at the last minute, they probably turned their radars on and taken a shot. Or they may have even fired without turning their radars on. So the Su-35 probably doesn't even know the F-16 was there. I'm not even saying it was an F-16 that shot that thing down. I think the Americans are using this to kind of capitalize on the fact they've got a layered air defense system in place now. But I bet it probably was a surface-to-air missile system that targeted the Su-35, and the Americans are just now talking a good game about it by saying the F-16 was there. It's actually going to be very hard for an F-16 to shoot down an Su-35 without some kind of other resource being utilized on the battlefield. The whole point of the war, there's so much fog. We call it the fog of war out there. So you're being passed things that each side wants you to know about. You know what I'm saying? So if we were so good at fighting in Ukraine right now, and remember, it's a proxy war, the West versus Russia. This is all this is, really. We just try and pretend it's not. But it's the Slavic brothers, kicking each other to pieces. And then obviously we're giving them as much weapons as we can. And this is why we're intensely vulnerable as a nation, and America is, and everyone that's feeding weapons in there, of course, because Russia will look at us supplying arms to an adversary, basically. And of course, that makes us vulnerable. The air war itself, I think in the early days was quite juvenile and quite basic. And this is why people were getting shot down quite a lot, because none of these things were really in place. We didn't have a command and control section. There wasn't an airborne early warning aircraft up there. Again, these things are vulnerable unless you protect them. And the Royal Air Force has found this out by putting its own aircraft over the Black Sea, unprotected by typhoons, and of course being challenged themselves by Russian aircraft. And rightly so, because what the Royal Air Force was doing was passing data back to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians were then using that data to target Russian troops. No adversary is ever going to tolerate that kind of behavior. It's just that we haven't declared war on Russia, have we? And that's why we can fight it in a very proxy manner. Now I think what's happened is over many years, the Ukrainians have been educated. Remember, we do educate troops over here as well in the UK about how to build that layered air defense system. And it's not super complex, but it does require a certain amount of education and talent and people that know what they're doing in these different systems in order to be able to pass that data that they're getting across to other units that can then act on that. And of course, every side then will do whatever they can to either jam or evade or disrupt that kind of command kill chain. And that's what the Russians are obviously very good at doing, especially when it comes to electronic warfare. And the Ukrainians are sort of catching up with that now with the help from the Western services. Yeah. If you're putting an aircraft over the Black Sea that is absorbing information from the battlefield, as the Royal Air Force was doing, absorbing information so it can tell where the systems that Russia is using are on the battlefield. Electronic warfare is the only warfare that's valid now. And this is what we're finding out with drones and everything else. It's all about the electromagnetic spectrum on the battlefield. And this is what I used to teach in the Air Force. And I spoke about it on my YouTube channel. I made a big video on it, and I got a lot of hate from other guys in the Air Force, but they understood what I was saying. If you take the information, as the Royal Air Force did, and you pass it to the Ukrainians, and then the Ukrainians use that information to target the Russian troops on the battlefield, which, at the level, these are still sons and daughters of Russian people, in the same way that Ukrainians are still sons and daughters of Ukrainian people. This is what I mean. It's an awful Slavic brother war going on out there. Then, of course, that Royal Air Force aircraft does become part of the battlefield, doesn't it? Whether you're outside of the, you're in international airspace, you can say I'm in international airspace, but you're still taking the information, you're still passing it back, you're still allowing Ukrainians to access that information to target Russian forces. You've become a target yourself. And that's the problem. That's why I said, if you're going to put that aircraft up there, then put some Typhoons with it. The truth is, though, the Royal Air Force, of course, it hasn't got the assets to continually field Typhoons next to all these listening aircraft that we have in the Air Force, electronic early warning aircraft, because, of course, we need a tanker up there as well to be able to refuel them. And now we've got to go and base ourselves out of somewhere. Now we've got to put people there. And we're a very small Air Force, about 30,000 people. And at some point, we have to realize that you're probably operating above the capabilities of the equipment that we currently have. So, yeah, it is a legitimate target. And, I don't want it to be, because I know these people. I worked them for a long time. But if you're going to do it, then defend it. But if you defend it, then what happens? The flankers still come up. The Typhoons then have to engage. And now Russia has dragged you into this conflict. And that's exactly what Putin wants. Putin is the sharpest mind out of anyone operating in this field right now. And people don't understand that. Multiple levels. And I get criticism from this. But if you read his book, if you read books by Philip Short, there's many books out there. I get called a Putin apologist. I'm not at all. But I have educated myself about the man. And what he's doing is purposely driving the West into a very difficult place that we're not going to be able to get out of. Well, it depends what model of F-16, to be fair, because some of the later variations with ASA radars are fantastic. But I think also it comes down to the training. Obviously, expert here, not at all. But, I think the Su-35 is a fantastic platform as a flanker from the Su-27 days and what they've done with it. But I think the way that it's being used by the Russians, of course, is not the best way. They're very reliant on ground control intercepts and things like this. And I think in Ukraine, that's the same sort of thing. If I had the Western backup, then put me in an F-16, most definitely. Of course, because I know when I'm flying. But if I had one of the AB variants in Ukraine, then I'd rather be in the Su-35. The Su-35 has got so much greater standoff. And of course, the range of these missiles depends on the speed and the height of the fighter as well. And the Su-35 is an exceptionally dominant air superiority fighter at the moment. So you just put two on the line and I'll walk towards both of them and I'll just make my decision on the day,